Okay, so chapter 23 builds on chapter 22, where we introduced the infinitives. Chapter 23 focuses on adverbial infinitives. Remember that infinitives basically are phrases that are used with a noun and adjectival and adverbial roles. Let's return to that same table that you found in chapter 22, where we see word group functions. And so we've looked at clauses before with dependent and independent clauses. But when we look at the way that we use phrases, remember we can have prepositional phrases and verbal phrases. And it's where we focus on verbal phrases that we see the use of infinitives and what we will see in the upcoming chapters, the use of participles. So we focused on infinitives in a sense of noun and adjectival functions. And in this chapter, we want to focus on its adverbial use, its use in a sense of supporting a verb. So let's see what we can do with that. We will encounter what we call constructs, because you will see particular phrases. Four main uses is what we recognize. The use of the infinitive in a way that your verbal phrase gives a sense of purpose or a sense of result, in a way that you translate the phrase. And typically, this idea of purpose or result ends up being kind of like a sense of pretty much your preferred translation. You can also give it a sense of cause, why this is. And then what we call a temporal sense, this idea of dealing with constructs of time. Okay, so four basic types of constructions. They can be articular and anarthers, just like when they had roles as nouns or adjectival infinitives. And we will be using prepositions at times. So anytime that you see these kind of prepositions, dia, eis, ein, meta, pro, pros, you may want to look for an infinitive in the neighborhood. Similar for conjunctions. When you see eos, prin, hos, and hoste, be aware that you might have an infinitive phrase. Here's a diction. All infinitives constructed with prepositions and conjunctions are adverbial. So anytime that you see an infinitive plus a preposition plus a conjunction, you have to translate it with one of these constructions. Now, that doesn't mean that the reverse is true as well. That if you don't see it, it's not adverbial. It can still be adverbial. It's just that you have a guarantee that if you see that, you have to translate it that way. All right. So let's look at some of these functions then. For example, a purpose construct. So you can find one without an article. And here would be an example. It's from Matthew 24. Proselthon, epidexai, auto tas oikodomas. So this idea of the disciples pointing out to Jesus the buildings, they came to point out, because it's an infinitive, to him, to Jesus, the buildings. We haven't really studied this particular verb yet. It comes from epideignumi. So instead of ending with an omega, it ends with a me. We call them me verbs. We will study this in chapters 27 and 28. But just take it from me that this then ends up simply being an aorist active infinitive. Notice the sibilant there, that actually ends with psi. So it's an aorist. Notice that there is no augment, because this is a compounded verb. And otherwise, between AP and dexai, you would have anticipated an augment. But in this case, we wouldn't have that, right? Because they're not inflected and we don't express time. But notice that it has a sense of purpose. You could kind of translate it as they came in order to point out. It was their very purpose to come there was to point out the buildings. Or you could have a same infinitive sort of phrase and add an article so that you express purpose. Eiselthein to menai sun autois, from the book of Luke. Luke loves infinitive phrases. So he went in order to stay with him. So menai from meno, right? in order to stay with them, is what you could read into that. So a sense of purpose. Or you could have what we call a prepositional infinitive. So you see a preposition, and you will see, of course, an infinitive there. So typical for this are the preposition eis with an article and the preposition pros for an article. They led him away to be crucified, van sta u row o. It becomes an infinitive by adding sai. See that? And so this idea of they led him away, the reason that they led him away is so they can crucify him. They led him away in order to be crucified. They do all their works to be seen, right? So that's an aorist passive infinitive. Look at the nai, right? From theaomai, it's a deponent in order to be seen. Or, remember, this is for sure an adverbial, in conjunction and an infinitive. Well, it's for true if you have a preposition as well. But there's hos, so isolthane, eis, tomein, samariton, hos etomasai, auto. So that's from Luke. The verb here is etoimatso. So it's an aorist active infinitive. They entered the Samaritan village in order to prepare for him. All right, so moving right along, another construct would be a result construct. Something is done as a result of something. For God is not unrighteous, such that as a result of God being unrighteous, he would overlook your work. This idea of epilanthanomai, to neglect. God is not unrighteous, such that he would neglect your work, and as a result, he would do that. That can also be articular, so there's the to in the form of ami. As a result, here is a prepositional infinitive, so you see the eis ta with the form of ami. And by the way, that's Romans 1:20. An example with the conjunctions, so notice a different conjunction here. I would put it on my reference card. If you see hoste, it's more likely to translate it as a sense of result rather than purpose. They spoke in such a manner that as a result, a great multitude believed. You see that from pisteuo. What about if you translate it as a sense of cause? Because it did not have root, it withered away. This is about the fig tree. Diata me ekain, from echo. So ritsan etsonante. Right? So it did not have. Or an idea of a temporal clause, the idea of working with time. So in that case, you would use yet a different prepositional infinitive, different prepositions. And notice they all have their own prepositions. Pra to, I tell you now, pra to from ginomai, see the setai, before it happens. Usually with a conjunction, prin or prin, sir, please come down before my child dies. Or while, or ain, they were terrified as or while they entered into the cloud, going up the mountain. Subsequent, so these are all words that you use in conjunction with time. See that? Simultaneously, subsequent, it's all like ordering things. After, meta, after I have been raised, from ekairo, right? You see the theta, eta there, and then the nai. And so practice a little bit with that. Make a list of it and just add that to your card.